Hello, everyone. My name is Caleb Russell, and today I'll be talking about a long-standing problem in the United States, rising drug prices. I know that I myself have taken prescription as well as non-prescription drugs in the past, just as I'm sure many of you have. This means that almost every one of us has been a victim of the constantly rising drug prices that have been such a prevalent problem for people everywhere around the country. These are problems that are shared by hundreds of millions of people. Like all problems, these ones have many solutions. Today, I'm going to share a few of the possible policies that can be put into place to try and stop this long-standing epidemic. By the end of this presentation, I hope that each and every one of you has a firm grasp of what's going on in the United States, as well as what can be done to prevent these prices from rising even more. First, I'd like to give a brief overview of what the highly priced drugs I talked about before are doing to American citizens. This graph was made by a survey from GoodRx that shows results of 30.9% of participants filling their prescription medicines puts a minor burden on their finances, with nearly 10% of people saying that it was a serious financial burden. Now I'd like to talk about some of the root causes for why these drug prices are so high. It's no secret that drug manufacturing companies and the middlemen need to make money. The higher the price on prescription drugs, the more money drug companies make. If prices drop, then drug companies may struggle to keep up with the costs of research and development. Lack of laws in place to keep these drug prices low and keep them from rising. The United States doesn't have the drug laws that countries in Europe have to help keep these prices low. There's a lack of not-for-profit drug companies. Drug companies in the US are all about profit. If this stays the same, then these companies will just keep on raising the prices in order to turn a profit. Scarcity. Drug scarcity is a serious cause for concern in the American economy. The less available a drug is on the market, the higher the price it'll be. Transparency about drug prices. Lack of transparency makes it harder for payers and buyers to negotiate these prices. Increased negotiations between Medicare and medical manufacturer would save millions and billions of dollars per year. Who's being affected by these issues? American citizens are the ones who face these rising drug prices. Citizens need these drugs to live, and the high prices put on some life-saving medications can lead to people taking their meds at the incorrect times to try and cut costs. This also puts their life in danger, though. Oftentimes, American citizens find themselves having to choose between paying for their life-altering medicine and feeding themselves, finding transportation to and from their jobs or places in general, and even paying for a place to live. While pharmaceutical companies are typically seen as the bad guys in these situations, lower drug prices could possibly affect their research and development teams. Higher drug costs and drug shortages add to the overall expenses paid by hospitals and clinics. The main structural problem is that American people pay ridiculously high prices compared to other countries in the world who have better policies that put less strain on their citizens. Americans everywhere skimp on their prescriptions to try and save money. How will these problems worsen if left unchecked? According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the graphs on the right show that over 8% of all Americans aged 18 through 64 said that they were not taking their prescribed medications at the right times. This is in order to try and reduce the cost they pay by taking less. This number increases by 20% for people with disabilities who take prescription medicine, mainly due to their ever-rising costs. Medicare beneficiaries of color and those with lower income are also significantly more likely to skip needed doses to avoid high costs. Without reforms, these numbers will only continue to rise. Without the necessary prescription drugs, many United States citizens face serious health risks and could even die. While having to pay egregious amounts for their medicine may leave them with no choice but to not take it, this is not the only issue with having to overpay for their prescriptions. Their overpaying also causes a serious financial burden that affects their day-to-day life and impedes them from being able to buy other things they need. Perhaps the best example of high drug prices in the US compared to other countries is the price of Actimmune, which in the US costs $4,360 per vial, while the same medication in other countries only costs $450 per vial, almost 10 times less. This can also be seen clearly with Harvoni, a hepatitis C medication that in the United States can cost more than double what it does in other countries. These are just a few examples of what will happen if reforms aren't made. Pharmaceutical companies. If drug prices go too low, these drug companies won't be able to keep up the supply, which will put the United States in a never-ending loop of low supply, high demand. Hospitals and clinics will even see even higher expenses the higher drug prices are. But what is stopping changes from being made to prevent these things from happening? Laws that affect pricing. Laws on the federal, state, and local levels make it difficult to put price caps on prescription medicines. In order for these prices to be capped, each and every state, federal, and local law about prescription drug prices would need to be reviewed and possibly changed. The market-driven healthcare system. If drug prices are lowered, then it makes sense that healthcare companies wouldn't be able to make as much profit. This could lead to them trying to make profit off of American citizens in other ways. Patent laws. Patent laws prevent other drug companies from creating similar drugs. If these laws were tweaked by maybe lowering how long the patent lasts, then more drugs could be created and introduced to the market, thus driving down drug prices. Big pharma companies claim that allowing Medicare to negotiate prices would actually hurt the United States citizens. They claim that lower prices would take away the necessary funds for drug research. Research shows that some pharmaceutical companies spend more money on marketing than the actual research and development of drugs. I believe that the proposals I will talk about next could be the answer to these problems. First, price caps would be implemented. Drug prices in the United States are an average of 156% higher than they are in other countries that use value-based pricing. Implementing price caps on medications would help hundreds of thousands of American families keep from wildly overpaying for something that they may need to live. The United Kingdom is able to keep generic drug prices low by utilizing their National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, also known as NICE. NICE assesses whether or not new drugs in the United Kingdom are cost effective. If deemed not to be cost effective, then drug companies must lower the list price of the drug or offer discounts if they'd like to receive federal funding. Implementing a system like this in the United States would keep companies from overcharging for medications that make American lives easier. Negotiate the prices of drugs by dealing with pharmaceutical companies directly. Drug prices in the United States are typically set by the company making the drugs, leaving the prices to be much higher on drugs in the United States than they are in other countries. As seen on the graph on the right, created by the U.S. Government Accountability Office, the Veterans Health Administration negotiates directly with pharmaceutical manufacturers and was able to pay, on average, 54% less for prescription drugs than Medicare was. This is primarily due to the fact that they bought straight from manufacturers, cutting out the middleman and saving money for their clients. We could also implement more nonprofit generic companies to generate different medicines. Nonprofit generic companies creating prescription drugs drives down the prices, forcing bigger corporations to lower their prices to something more affordable. Perhaps one of the best examples of one of these companies is Civica RX. Civica's mission is to help lower prescription drug costs by working with trusted manufacturers to produce generic medicine to be sold at lower prices. Compared to for-profit manufacturers, their order fill rates are around 10% higher, and it also provided increased supply benefits at a cost 46% less than for-profit organizations. More nonprofit drug companies doing things like Civica does could help the American citizens by putting more generic drugs on the market at a lower price. Patent laws. Patent laws allow for a drug company to be the sole sellers of any new drug they create for a set period of time. Being the sole corporation to buy from allows them to set their drugs at ridiculously high price. And since the patent prevents other companies from making a generic version of the drug and putting that on the market, people in need are forced to pay for these outrageously priced drugs. While it is understandable that drug companies deserve to make profit off of their inventions, many abuse the patent laws by making minor tweaks to their product in order to extend how long they're allowed to be the only company selling their drugs. Drug companies will file hundreds of patents on the same drug in an attempt to ward off generic drug companies, since they would have to pay millions in legal fees to obtain the right to sell a similar drug. A prime example of this is AbbVie, a company that produces a drug to combat arthritis. AbbVie managed to extend its original patent by over 7 years by filing over 300 new patents on the drug, 166 of which were secured. Their drug pulled in more than double the profit than the second place drug on the market, most of which was acquired after the primary patent would have expired. Changing patent laws to prevent situations like this from occurring would save American citizens billions of dollars by allowing generic companies to market their drugs after the original patent expires, without them having to spend millions of dollars on legal fees to put their drug on the market. What are the possible criticisms of the advocacy? Any policy about anything will always have a side that goes directly against it. In this case, this is anybody who stands to profit from drug prices being so high. Pharmaceutical companies would directly oppose any policy that would lower their profits. Many state that lower profits would lead to less research and development, and therefore less drugs in the market. But an increase in nonprofit drug companies would combat this issue and keep drug development running. Pharmacy benefit managers act as middlemen who share in the profits of the drugs being sold, so naturally they'd like to keep prices high so they can keep getting paid more. Finally, people who invest into large pharmaceutical companies would directly oppose any policies that stand to lower the profits from these companies. In conclusion, implementing price caps using value-based pricing, direct negotiations with large companies, increasing the amount of nonprofit generic companies, and adjusting patent laws are all great policies that could help lower drug prices for United States citizens. Even implementing just one of these policies would benefit tens, if not hundreds of millions of Americans. I hope that everyone watching this walks away with a heightened knowledge about drug prices in America and continues to keep these policies in mind whenever they or someone they know is struggling with affordable drugs. Thank you. Here's my citations.